All right, so we're about to record season two's episode 22, and this one's near and dear to my heart. So I'm not going to stall anymore. Let's get into this one.
Each segment of the mission, every individual piece has to be completed perfectly in order for the next step to be possible.
As the launch operations manager, the launch team wishes you good luck and Godspeed.
Mars will come to fear my botany powers.
On July 20th, 1969, humans landed on the moon. And then just a few years later, we stopped going. More than 50 years passed before humans traveled around the moon again. Why? Did we forget how? Did the technology disappear? And if we could do it with computers from the 1960s, why did it take more than half a century to go back? Well, we knew where the moon was. We had to rebuild the road. And this year, the road carried humans around the moon again. Its name is Artemis. And as it happens, July 20th is a pretty special day for me too. It's my birthday. So as I complete another trip around the sun, I thought this would be the perfect time to look at two generations of moon missions, Apollo and Artemis, and ask a bigger question. When you accomplish something extraordinary, how do you take the next giant leap?
Talking about gadgets, games, and gears. AI buzzing in your ears. Parents, teachers, kids unite. We're learning tech and doing it right. Oh, it's a tap, swipe, scroll kind of show where zeros and ones are ready to go. From old school DOS to robots that talk, we're jamming with Mr. Fred's Tech Talks.
Hey everyone, I'm Mr. Fred, and welcome. I'm glad you're here. This is the next episode, and we're going to continue to explore technology, coding, AI, and the stories behind technology changing our world. And today, we're heading back to the moon. Now, longtime listeners may remember that Apollo 11 has made an appearance on this podcast before. So way back in season 1, episode 2, we talked about the technology that helped get Apollo 11 to the moon. And I've also written about the Apollo guidance computer on the getmecoding.com website. And I have a YouTube video where I talk about one of my favorite moments from the landing. It's the famous 1202 program alarm. If you don't know that story, I'm going to put the links to all of those in the show notes and go check those out because they are really fun to listen to and they're really interesting. But here's the short version. As Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were descending toward the moon, their guidance computer suddenly started displaying these alarms. Not exactly what you want to see when you're trying to land on another world. The computer was simply overloaded. The software had been designed to prioritize the most important tasks, allowing the landing to continue. It's really an incredible story about software and engineering and preparation and people making decisions under enormous pressure. I love that story. I'm hoping someday, too, that's going to be a movie. That would be a great story to see on the big screen. But that's not the story I want to tell today, though, because Apollo 11 succeeded. The astronauts came home. More Apollo missions followed. And after Apollo 17, we stopped going. Which brings us back to that question. Why? If we could send people to the moon using technology from the 1960s, why couldn't we just do it again? And the answer is surprisingly simple. We didn't forget how to get to the moon. Apollo was built for a very specific moment in history. The United States was in the middle of what we called the Cold War. There were tensions between us and the Soviets, the Russians. And the space race was on. The country committed enormous resources, a massive workforce, and there were specialized factories and hundreds of contractors and launch facilities and spacecraft and the enormous Saturn V rocket to accomplish one goal: land Americans on the moon and bring them home safely. And we did it. But once that goal was achieved, priorities changed, Apollo ended, Saturn V rockets stopped being built, factories changed, supply chains disappeared, engineers and technicians, well, they moved on. The infrastructure that made Apollo possible wasn't sitting in a warehouse for 50 years waiting for someone to turn the lights back on. So when people ask, if we went to the moon in 1969, why couldn't we just do it again? Here's the way I think about it. We knew where the moon was. We had to rebuild the road. But there was another difference. This time, NASA wasn't simply trying to recreate Apollo. The goal had changed. And that new road has a name. Artemis. The Artemis program is designed to return humans to the moon, but not simply to repeat Apollo. The larger goal is sustained exploration, to learn how humans can operate on and around the moon for longer periods, and to work with commercial companies and international partners, conduct new science, and to use what we learn as a stepping stone towards something even farther away, Mars. But before we could think about Mars, you have to make sure your new spacecraft works. So Artemis I flew without astronauts. That mission demonstrated that Orion could travel around the moon and return to Earth. Success. But there was an obvious next question. Could we put people aboard? And on April 1st, 2026, Artemis II launched.
RS-25 engines lit. 4, 3, 2, 1. Booster ignition. And liftoff. The crew of Artemis II now bound for the moon. Humanity's next great voyage begins.
Good roll pitch.
Roger, roll pitch.
Reed, Victor, Christina, and Jeremy, on this historic mission, you take with you the heart of this Artemis team, the daring spirit of the American people and our partners across the globe, and the hopes and dreams of a new generation. Good luck. Godspeed, Artemis II. Let's go.
Man, was it exciting. 4 astronauts climbed on board. Reed Weissman, Victor Glover, Christina Koch, and the Canadian astronaut, Jeremy Hansen. They traveled around the moon and returned safely to Earth on April 10th. For the first time since the Apollo era, human beings had traveled to the vicinity of the moon. And here's something I find amazing. At its farthest point, Artemis II traveled 252,756 miles from Earth. Think about that for a moment. Imagine looking back at Earth from that distance. Everyone you've ever known, every city, every country, every argument, every birthday party, even every Lego brick that you've ever stepped on barefoot, all of it, back there, together. For my generation, though, moon missions were largely something we look back on, something from the history books. Old television footage, old black and white television footage. Pictures of astronauts wearing bulky white spacesuits. For kids growing up today, that's different. They now have their own moon mission. Apollo belongs to history. Artemis is happening now. But flying around the moon isn't the same as landing on it. So what's next? For a long time, many people, including me, heard Artemis III being described as the mission that would put astronauts back on the lunar surface. But plans changed. And that's actually an important part of this story. NASA is currently planning for Artemis III to be a crewed demonstration mission in 2027. Rather than landing astronauts on the moon, Artemis III is expected to test critical systems closer to Earth. That crew is going to fly around on board Orion and work with the commercial lunar landing systems being developed for future moon missions. They're going to practice things like rendezvous and docking, which is very complicated. They're going to test how these different spacecraft and systems all work together. Now, as you hear this, you might think, well, wait a minute. We went around the moon with Artemis II, and now Artemis III is staying close to Earth? Isn't that going backward? Not necessarily. Because sometimes the next giant leap requires taking a smaller step first. Thinking about this in terms of what I do at Get Me Coding, I want you to think about learning to code. You write your program, it works. Then you add something new, and suddenly it doesn't work anymore. So what do? You test. You isolate the pieces, you connect one component at a time, and you make sure System A can talk to System B, and then you find the problems while the stakes are still manageable. And then you move forward. That's what good engineering looks like. But the mission that makes the landing possible might be the one where engineers prove two spacecraft can successfully meet and connect. Artemis III isn't the destination. It's part of building the road. Because after Artemis III comes the mission everyone will be watching, Artemis IV. NASA currently targets early 2028 for humanity's return to the lunar surface. Now, 2 astronauts are expected to descend to the moon and spend approximately a week exploring near the lunar South Pole. If successful, humans will once again leave footprints on the moon. But those footprints will be connected to a journey that began long before Artemis IV ever leaves the launch pad. Apollo, Artemis I, Artemis II, Artemis III. One mission building on another. One generation building on another. And that brings me back to July 20th. Every July 20th, I get to celebrate 2 things. The anniversary of Apollo 11 landing on the moon and another birthday. Now, I'm not suggesting NASA scheduled the Apollo 11 moon landing to coincide with my birthday. But I'm also not saying they didn't. So, I'll let the historians sort that one out. As I've gotten older, birthdays have started to feel a little different. We all know that. When you're a kid, birthdays are about presents and cake. And when you're at my age, birthdays are partially about cake and some vanilla ice cream, my favorite. And partially wondering why your ankles and your knees suddenly make creaking and clicking noises. But birthdays, they're milestones. They're markers. You know, another completed orbit around the sun. And milestones have a way of making us look backward. What do I accomplish? What went right? What went wrong? Where have I been? But you know what? Maybe the more interesting question is, where am I going next? That's something I've been thinking about with Get Me Coding, especially this past summer, especially with the advent of AI. And for years, I've been trying to help kids and their parents and teachers understand that technology isn't something we should simply consume. It's something we can explore, question, build, break, and then fix. And then use it to create something new. I don't know if one of the kids listening to this podcast, watching one of my YouTube videos, or taking a coding class, or building something with Lego, or experimenting with a robot, will someday be that worker on a mission to Mars. Maybe. That would be pretty cool. But I do know this. The people who take the next giant leap are sitting somewhere today asking questions. They're tinkering, experimenting. They're trying something that doesn't work. And then they're trying it again. That's how we got from Apollo to Artemis. And it's how we'll get from Artemis to whatever comes next. All right. So here's your next tech challenge for this episode. I'm going to call this one Carry the Mission Forward. I want you to pick one piece of technology. It could be anything: a computer, a video game console, a robot, smartphone, a car, even a Lego set. Find out what an earlier version looked like. What problem did it solve? What couldn't it do? Then look at the version we have today. What changed? What's better? And then finally, and this is the fun part, and probably the hardest part for some of us, imagine the next version. What would you change? What would you add? What problem could you solve that the people who created the original never imagined? Draw it, build it, write about it, or maybe code it, vibe code it now. Because innovation isn't always about starting from zero. Sometimes it's about understanding what someone else built and carrying the mission forward. That's also pretty cool. On July 20th, 1969, Apollo 11 showed us that humans could walk on the moon. For decades, that achievement belonged largely to history. But this year, Artemis II carried humans around the moon again. Artemis III is going to test another piece of the puzzle, and if current plans hold, Artemis IV will put humans back on the lunar surface. The giant leap didn't end. It paused. And now another generation is picking up the mission. That's something I'm thinking about as I celebrate another birthday this July 20th. Maybe our lives work the same way. We reach milestones and we celebrate them. We look back at, how far we've come. But then we look forward Because the most interesting question isn't always, what did you accomplish? Sometimes it's, what are you going to do next? Apollo passed something to Artemis. Teachers pass something to students. Parents, well, you pass something to your children. And each generation gets an opportunity to take what it inherited, learn from it, improve it, and carry it a little further. Maybe even 252,756 miles farther. All right, thanks for being with me here today. I'm so glad you tuned into this one, especially around this time of the year, midway through the summer if you're listening to it. And if you enjoyed this episode, make sure you follow or subscribe. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit that subscribe bell. Wherever you're listening, just subscribe. And if you want to go deeper into the technology behind Apollo 11, check out the earlier Apollo 11 episode from season 1. I believe it's episode 2. I'll also link to it in my Get Me Coding show notes here about the Apollo guidance computer and the YouTube video where I explain the famous 1202 program alarm. Those are great companions to this particular episode. And if you want to explore more of technology behind the mission, you could easily head out to Google and do some more searching even there. There's tons of information out there. And if you know someone, I would ask you this favor. Pass it along to them. Maybe they're a parent, a teacher, a student, a fellow techie who might enjoy this story. I want to keep growing this message. I want to keep growing this vibe and this feeling. We got to think positive. We got to put ourselves out there. And essentially, with you sharing it, it helps people discover this. And apparently, happy birthday to me. Another orbit completed. Woohoo! I'm not exactly sure where the next one is going to take me, but I'm looking forward to finding out. Until next time, keep learning, keep tinkering, keep exploring, and keep asking, what's the next giant leap?
With all due respect, sir, I believe this is going to be our finest hour.